So let me tell you a bit of Ed's story. Ed was born in a time of conflict, of war. His father chose the wrong side in that war. And so after that side lost, he had to leave the country. Then his mother died when he was barely a toddler. Those who took him in taught him a trade. It was painting. Painting houses, painting signs, painting vehicles. He was a painter. And those who took him in also gave him faith. He became a Quaker, an advocate for peace. So, of course, sometimes, as happens when you adopt a new faith, Ed's faith grew deeper. And he ended up being a preacher. And he didn't make a lot of money preaching. So he also kept painting. And in addition to painting houses and signs and little decorative things, he began to paint scenes. Well, one scene in particular. He painted it over and over and over. So here's the thing. Ed lived over 200 years ago. His name was Edward Hicks, and he was born at the time of the Revolutionary War into an Anglican family that remained loyal to the crown. When his dad left for England. And as Edward Hicks grew up as a Quaker preacher, he was haunted, I guess, by one scene. The painting he kept painting over and over again is called A Peaceable Kingdom. You might know that painting. We're going to show a picture of it. It might look familiar to you. Or maybe you've seen a different version because, like I said, there is version after version after edition of this painting. Some sources say over 60 paintings. Some sources say over 100 paintings of this scene from Isaiah 11, this image of a peaceable kingdom. Wolf and sheep, lion and calf, child and snake. That's the image that was at the center of this child born of war and grown up to be a man of peace, the center of his heart. This image from Isaiah, a prophet who had also known the brutality and the cost of war. Isaiah speaking to a community that had also known those realities, a community that probably couldn't imagine a different kind of world. And then the prophet says, imagine this. So let me invite you, imagine this. A green shoot grows out of a dead stump. That stump that was cut off that looked like there would be no life in it. Isaiah says, imagine hope where there has only been despair. You guys already said these words today. Isaiah says, imagine a world beyond predator and prey. Imagine a world full of the knowledge of God. Imagine a world where they do not hurt or destroy in all of God's holy world. Imagine God's peaceable kingdom. And that ancient vision is still captivating today, isn't it? As we know about conflict and war around the world, go ahead, list the places. Ethiopia, Iran, Palestine, Ukraine. We long for a peaceable kingdom. And in this country, in this time, when conflict has been so inflamed that sometimes people in the same family can't talk to each other. Don't we long for a peaceable kingdom? And in this winter season of cold and dark, the long gray, I've heard people call it, and in this season of Advent, when we are all hoping for some sign of green, when the songs of peace on earth are all around us but seem so far from us, don't we long for a peaceable kingdom? I know I feel like I've kind of spent my life painting that same picture over and over again, trying to get it right. It seems so central to my faith. Don't you wonder why he painted it so many times? Just a snapshot, just an image, just a moment in time, but maybe we can have those moments of a peaceable kingdom. Feels so central to my faith. And let me just say, haven't you been painting that too? Haven't you in your heart been coming together every Sunday, been waking up every morning, been girding your loins with faith and justice and paint and brushes in hand, walking out into the world to see what you can add? And I know sometimes paint smears, the brushes slip. I know it's not easy. And with just a handful of people here, or just little me, we might feel a bit powerless with the huge canvas of the world. But still, it's worthwhile to ask, which kingdom are we painting? What are we adding? Because I believe that every one of us, paint strokes we add makes a difference. I think Isaiah believed it too. I think God believes that too. So this morning, in the name of peace, in the name of hope, in the name of love, in the season of Advent, I just want to add a few colors to your palette, if I may. And let me do that by pointing to a book I've been reading. It's called High Conflict by the journalist Amanda Ripley. Anybody here read that book? If you raise your hand, you might end up here in the pulpit. I'll let you take over. So nobody's raising their hand. I don't know if anyone on Zoom has read the book. It's called High Conflict. And if you want to add that to the chat, the author's name is Amanda Ripley. I should have given you that ahead of time, Dave. And I'm sorry, I apologize that I didn't. But it's a pretty decent book overall. Ripley explores the nature of conflict. She has covered a lot of conflicts in her journalistic career, and she makes a distinction between what she calls healthy conflict. You know, the conflict that comes simply by being together. Who's going to do the dishes tonight? What are we going to have for breakfast? That kind of healthy conflict that's just a matter of what it means to be together. And what she calls high conflict, self-perpetuating, all-consuming, us versus them, that conflict that always leads to destruction. And while there's a lot of wisdom in Ripley's book, I want to just make 2 points that I think relates to us as kingdom people. The first is high conflict polarizes us. High conflict demands an us versus them. Haven't you felt that energy? A good versus a bad, a very binary division. And the us versus them becomes a trap. I might give you an example from my own history. This week, we celebrated or honored or remembered World AIDS Day. Maybe you were part of some remembrance. Maybe it slipped by and you didn't even particularly notice. But I lived in the Bay Area in the 1980s when AIDS was just emerging. And the us versus them energy around AIDS was profound and incredibly destructive. And the church was a part of that destruction. Well, certainly nobody in church would get AIDS, because isn't that just the gay disease? I actually, in my little church in San Jose, where I had actually found a refuge as a lesbian in the late 80s, sat in a little forum where we were talking about AIDS. And the preacher, I wasn't a UCC preacher then, I was just a refugee in the UCC, maybe a little bit like Ed of our paintings, finding refuge in the Quaker church. But the preacher said, well, what would you all do if I got AIDS? And the congregation, I mean, without batting an eye, said, oh, we'd have to fire you. Yeah, that's where we were in the 80s. I hear you I hear the intake of breath, but cast your mind back if you can. If you're not, if you weren't alive then, don't worry about it. You have your own us versus them issues. But yeah, it was us versus them. And where did it come from? Fear. We can keep ourselves safe as long as we establish the distinction between us and them. That mentality dominated our AIDS conversation. But like I said, you don't have to go back to the 80s to see us versus them, do you? I mean, you just have to open this morning's newspaper. God help us. God help us. Us versus them mentality. What's the solution? Of course, Ripley might say it, but we all know it's a biblical solution. The answer, as Ripley says, is expand your understanding of who us is, right? Who's the us? It's all of us. It's all of us. I'll take you back to another old illustration. When I was younger, the first astronauts who went up and saw the Earth from space reported a profound spiritual experience when they realized there are no borders in space. It's all of us. Or let me take you to a bumper sticker I saw the other day that is as close as this picture. The Earth does not belong to us. We belong to the Earth. It's all of us. It's all of us. And I think the spiritual work of any faith community today is to keep expanding that definition of us, right? That little congregation in San Jose who said they'd have to fire their preacher if she had AIDS. They've changed. Congregations change. People grow. And may our growing be in the direction of expanding that definition of us. So the second piece of advice, I know you're waiting for it, that Ripley gives for avoiding or getting out of high conflict situations. Listen to this. It's to keep the story complex. Do not simplify the story. Don't assume you know the whole story. Ask more questions. Stay curious. Don't simplify the story. So the example she gives, I love this example because I can relate to it, is she talks about she was driving somewhere and she was worried about something. She got so distracted that she came up to a stop sign and she didn't see it, and she ran right through. And thank goodness nobody was injured, nobody was hurt, horns were honking. She looked up, oh my goodness, I'm carrying so much, I just ran a stop sign. That's her story. A little bit later, somebody else in front of her ran a stop sign and she said, that idiot, that arrogant person who doesn't think the rules apply to them. And she caught herself and she said, wow, how quick I am to think I know the story of the other person and to define that story by what I see and what I assume. Don't make the story simple. My sister, she was here a couple of weeks ago. Some of you met her. She spent her career as a midwife. And whenever we would be driving down the freeway together and a car would race by us, and I would want to say, that idiot, she would say, there must be a woman in that car having a baby. She gave them the grace of the story. She kept the story open. She refused to make it simple. She refused to think she knew the answer. Ripley in the book tells the story of the lawyer Gary Friedman, who developed the mediation style of ending a marriage, navigating the end of a marriage. In the 80s, this lawyer who had been trained in litigation said, why don't we not go to court? Why don't we just sit down and talk to each other and see if we can find a way through that is not oppositional? And Friedman suggested asking 3 questions in the midst of conflict. This is the get curious part. The first question is, what would it look like if you got what you want? What would it look like if you got what you want? Second question, what do you wish they knew about you? What's your story? Boy, I can relate to that one. How many times in the midst of conflict have I wanted to explain and explain and explain? What do I wish they knew about me? Don't you know how much I care? Don't you know how much I carry? Don't you want to know my story? And then the third question, what do you want to understand about them? Stay curious. Don't make it simple. What do you want to understand about them? Well, that can complicate the story, can't it? Now let me just say, as a preacher, I feel the confinement of the simple story because I only get to preach for a few minutes. I don't get to tell you about the whole book, the cautions she puts in there. I don't get to tell you all of the steps of high conflict and its resolution, or at least a path forward. So I want to encourage you today to keep it open. Don't close the story. Don't assume you've heard the sermon and now you know what I meant, and go out and put any kind of shame trip on yourself about how you get along or what you're able to do. Let's keep it open. Underneath, God offers us story. You've already talked about it. You've already named it in this worship service. It's a story dominated by love and justice. It's a story we're going to celebrate in just a few minutes at that communion table. Like I said earlier, it's an open table. It's a table where we're all invited to bring our stories, all of our stories. You know what you'll be met with right here? Truth and grace. And don't we need them both? The whole story lived out in justice and love. So, go ahead, grab your paintbrushes, take a look up there. Speaking of a simple story, maybe your eye has been drawn to the animals, has it? See what's in the lower part of that picture? The people in the background? That's William Penn signing a treaty with the Native Americans who lived in the Pennsylvania area. William Penn, who was the one who brought Quaker religion and made it safe for Pennsylvania. But clearly we see that part of the story. Keep it complicated, right? It's not just sitting down and everything being peaceful. Those of us living in 2022 know the deep, deep betrayal that's also a part of that story. It's why we gotta keep painting. It's why we don't lay the brushes down. And I will tell you, it is why it makes a difference every day which kingdom you choose to paint. Amen.